we're good.
All right, and I'm welcome, and I'm Dr. Tricia Seymour.
I'm Dr. Rusty Barrier.
Or I should say aloha. We were in Hawaii, so I had to buy something, right?
So did I.
So we'll say aloha, right? We're not in Hawaii now. Anyway, go ahead.
Go ahead. You
Topic.
Topic. Oh, tonight. What are we talking about? Okay, we are talking tonight about shadow walking. And please notice we did not call it shadow working because we have a very different take. Please realize, for those of you not just here but on camera, Tricia and I look at this from top down, not from bottom up. So I know you have a beautiful example of what that means.
Oh, just the analogy of, and many of you have heard this before, but the analogy of an ant in the forest. An ant in the forest sees the forest as this little, heap of dirt, not very big, right? Leaves and bugs and whatever. A monkey who's flying through the trees in the forest sees the forest differently, right? Because their vision, their view of the forest is different. An eagle who flies over the forest sees the forest differently because they can go farther, they see it's bigger, they can see everything down below. And an astronaut out in space probably doesn't see the forest, they just see a patch of green, maybe. And so it's a very different way to look at it. And so when you come into metaphysics, you typically most of us have been the ant, right? We just know what we've been taught and what everybody's told us in our family of origin and our religion we grew up in, and that's what was truth. And then as we awaken in metaphysics, we become those monkeys and we see it from a little bit different perspective and a little higher perspective, and different things happen to us in our lives, and we have different ways of explaining it than we did when we were an ant. And then we evolve to be that eagle, where we see things from a very different perspective, and we kind of look at it. And Rusty and I look at it from the astronaut, and so we're telling you kind of a top-down view instead of a bottom-up view. And a lot of the people, even people that teach here at the center, they teach ants to be monkeys or monkeys to be eagles, and we say there's farther. Keep going. There's more. There's a different perspective. Just keep going.
And that's all it is in each one of those. It's not that anyone is better or worse or higher or lower. It's just a different perspective. And as you grow, you notice you can shift your perspective easier and easier. Which, by the way, I'll also make a little joke here and say, Tricia just informed you that we do know we are space cadets.
So tonight is shadow walking, as Rusty said, which is different than what most people call it. They call it shadow work or working. And there's a reason for that. We actually are both PhDs in psychology, so our background comes from the world of psychology. And the concept of shadow is actually a psychology term, and it's Carl Jung. And Carl Jung lived in I wrote it down so I can remember.
1875 to 1961.
And he studied under and was a Freudian psychologist who went towards spirituality. And so he coined terms like shadow work and the shadow. He coined terms like, he looked at the unconscious. He coined terms like collective conscious and collective unconscious. Those all come out of Jungian psychology. He also is known for dream work. And the concept of archetypes, which we've talked about a little bit in previous conversations we've had here. And so Carl Jung, his concept of shadow is very different than what most metaphysicians talk about when they talk about doing your shadow work.
You might want to define what metaphysicians think.
That's what's next.
Okay.
Go for it.
Go for it. All right. Most of the time in the metaphysical community, when someone is talking about your shadow, they're talking about those parts of you that you would prefer to externalize, and you call them demons, or you call them negative energy, or you call them dark energy, and it's things that you're trying to put out here. Okay, you don't want to admit that that's part of who you are. It is part of who you are. That's the big difference between what metaphysics calls shadow work and what we actually call shadow walking.
And shadow work tends to be the concept of getting rid of.
Yeah.
So if it's something that has attached to you, a dark energy that is attached to you, you want to get rid of it. That's what metaphysics tends to teach. Not everybody teaches that. In psychology, we say that shadow is you. You can't get rid of it. You just have to figure out what that is and embrace it. It's not like it's something external that's bothering you. It's something internal.
Really not even a negative at all. In psychology, the shadow it's just a part of you that for whatever reason you decided was not something you wanted to admit about yourself.
Sometimes that's things you just don't want to look at.
Yeah.
So it could be like you had trauma in the past,
right,
in your family of origin, or you had trauma in a past job, or things you just want to ignore. I don't want to deal with that, right? I want to just push that away, put it in a little box, never look at it. It could be impulses you have that you want, nope, that's not okay in my family, that's not okay in my culture, I just don't want to look at that. You want to push it away. So anything that you don't want to face or you push to your unconscious mind in psychology is considered your shadow.
In what we're doing now is we're going to ask you as we go through this process to take a look at some of those things perhaps, and we're not going to do this out loud, you're not going to talk back to us like a workshop, but we may do one of those one of these days. But we're going to ask you to consider what are some of the things that you learned from your family of origin, from your religion, that were taboo. Okay, because when you look at those taboos, those things that were no, 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 you do that, you go to hell, you may discover that they aren't really taboo. It just was taboo in your family or your culture. I'll give you an example. When I started looking at some of this, I was raised in a very, very fundamentalist family, right? I actually won an Igloo ice chest as a kid. I was probably like 12 or 13, and it had a Falstaff label on it.
Which is?
A beer. Okay, I don't think it exists anymore, but
right,
it's a beer. It was a beer brand.
A beer logo.
Right. My grandmother threw it away when I brought it home because it was a sin for other people to think that we drank beer. Now, is it a sin to drink beer? No. All right, but that's what's buried in your shadow. Some of those kind of belief systems that keep you from functioning as a whole being.
So although it didn't happen to you, what could happen to someone is that they could actually then think anybody who drinks is terrible, awful, and is going to go to hell, or they could actually believe that it was really, really bad because it's what they were taught growing up.
Correct.
And they wanted to fit into their family or their culture or whatever, and therefore they embraced what they were taught rather than went, gotta be kidding me.
Right.
Right? And so you embraced those things and you held on to them. And again, I think sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's
just a misunderstanding that you had as a child about how things work. You know, we didn't really comprehend how life works when we were 2 as we do when we're 12 or when we're 22 or 42 or 62. How life works, we tend to grow as we age and grow.
One of the things that everybody hopefully understands is that your conscious mind, the part that's thinking right now, the part that we're speaking with, the conscious part of our brain is not what runs your life. That is not what runs your life.
You've seen the picture of the iceberg, right? Got this much iceberg here, this much under the water. That's your conscious. This is your unconscious.
Your unconscious mind is what makes decisions. Your unconscious mind is what makes choices. Your unconscious mind is what runs your life. So when people say, as a therapist, when people come to me and go, I thought I worked on this, I've worked on this, and I've worked on this, and it's still coming up, it's because it's still in the unconscious mind. It's still there. It hasn't been looked at, embraced, whatever, and moved on from. So shadow can be anything as simple as a belief that you grabbed onto when you were a kid that beer was bad.
Beer's bad.
So now you have this shame if you drink a beer, right? So that could be part of your shadow. It can be part of you that you don't want to look at, like past trauma from your family of origin, from your life, from a marriage. It can be personality traits you don't wanna look at. So if your dad or mom were really angry or bitter, and you're like, I'm never gonna be like that, just know that's inside of you.
You're gonna be like
you're
that.
gonna, if you ignore it, you're gonna be like that. You're gonna wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, I am my mom. Oh my gosh, I am my dad. You know, right?
You're gonna say something and hear mom or dad come out of your mouth.
Because it is still there unless you look at it, right? Unless you acknowledge it.
Right. And the part of what's in the shadow, because we don't want to look at, we're actually scared of our shadow. And we've been taught to be afraid of the shadow. And there's no need for that. The shadow holds our greatest strengths, because a lot of times what we have put down there are things that will actually serve us. They actually protect us from things that we didn't know what to do with back then. They also are skill sets that we don't necessarily want to own, shall we say. So when you do shadow walking, when you go in there and you look at those parts of you that you're afraid of,
Embarrassed of,
pass judgment on,
right.
whatever.
Wish you didn't have, wish
Right.
never took place, any of those kinds of things, when you just wanna ignore it. That's what we're talking about, that you can't ignore it, because
Right.
it's gonna run your life. Run and possibly ruin your life if you just keep ignoring it.
Again, I'll talk about myself, and I learned part of this in undergraduate, when we were studying a person by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who came out and taught us all about grief and loss. And one of the statements that she made was that, please understand that inside of each of us there is a Hitler. There is the ability to be the most awful, terrible being you can imagine. But until you recognize that, till you accept that, till you embrace that, some of those behaviors that might have been prevalent will bubble up to the surface until you look at it. When Tricia and I first met, I informed her, please understand, I can only be good for so long. Then I have to go do something to blow off steam, which usually means I want to go out and party somewhere. All right, now that has gotten less and less over the years. But I understood, as in my 20s especially, that if I didn't let that out in a controlled manner, it was going to pop up at the wrong time. And it would just bubble up and suddenly, I've lost 3 days. Not really. But I would go party a little heavier than I should. So that's the shadow. Look at what your shadow is. If it's behaviors, embrace them. I'm capable of this. I choose not to fall into this over and over again.
And like I said, another example, which may sound extreme, but another example would be somebody who their culture says something's wrong. And so that's the collective unconscious, right? The culture you're brought up in says it's wrong. The religion you're brought up in says it's wrong. But inside you want to do it. Whether that's drinking or drugging or whatever, you want to go against the culture. And so if you push that down and you keep going, no, I can't do it, it's going to come up. You're going to find yourself, people often find themselves going out and using drugs, even though they don't want to, because they aren't facing that part of themselves. They aren't facing the hurt, the feelings, the emotions, the trauma, the life, and it's coming out anyway.
Right.
Another example that's kind of silly, but it would be like if somebody wanted to run around naked and never put clothes on. But in this country, here in the United States, we don't do that unless there's a few controlled places you can do that, right? But that's, they're called nudist colonies or nudist beaches, but for the most part, that's not acceptable here. You have to wear clothes. So there may be a part inside of someone who goes, no, I can't, and then they push it down and push it down and push it down, and it comes up in weird ways, right? Now, if they lived in a different culture where nudism was accepted, like let's say somewhere in some tribe in Africa, and that's what they grew up with, then there would not be a taboo. So as he was saying, those things that are taboo in your culture, in your family, in your religion, those are often also things that you need to look at and see that shadow that might be there.
The other way that the shadow will play out in your life is self-sabotage, right? And if you have that happening, if there's a goal you're working towards that you haven't achieved, my guess is it's going to be you need to go back inside and look at when you first had that feeling that you wanted to achieve but you couldn't, and look at what it is that is what's holding that in place, right? To truly look at those things, it requires that you take a step back, though. If you're looking at it and going, I gotta fix this, this is what's wrong with me, all you're doing is pushing your shadow further back into the shadow. You don't try to make friends with a cat that's been in the neighborhood that doesn't really have a home, feral cat, by yelling at it and throwing things at it, do you? You give it a little food, you give it a little milk, you talk softly to it, you talk kindly to it. This is the same way you need to work with your own shadow, right? Very seldom is any shadow that you find inside of yourself an adult. Okay, they are usually children. You don't want to yell at children, you don't want to hurt children, you don't want to make them go away. You want to invite them into your world. All right, I know you're hurting. I know that for some reason, every time I try to achieve this goal, you pop up and block it. I really want this. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are you doing? I will tell you that about 9 times out of 10, that little shadow, that shadow being inside of you, it's still you, it's not anything but you, was at that point protecting you from something in childhood. There's something that had you done that as a child, it would have totally disrupted your family, or you would have been disapproved of, or whatever, disapproved of.
Right. So think, take time to maybe journal or write down and think about the things in your life that, or in your own personality, or inside yourself, or in your life experiences you wish weren't there, right? Or things that you feel like you're guided, you want to do, but you can't. So think about those types of things. So again, some of those things might be as simple as not achieving a goal.
Mm-hmm.
They can be as much as, I know I have a temper, I just have to control it, right? Or I sound like my mother or my father, oh my gosh, I'll never be like them.
Or I keep getting the relationship with the same person in a different body.
Yeah, right. Or it can also be, you mentioned Hitler, it can also be, I know that within myself, and I'm speaking first person now, I know that within myself I have the ability to kill someone. I've never acted on it. But I know that that's in there because I have to embrace that part of myself. I can't say, ooh, no, I'd never do that. The biggest thing that we hide in the shadows are our biases and our judgments. So if you have biases and judgments about other people in any way, poor people, rich people, black people, white people, and we all do.
Right.
There is not a single being on this planet that does not have a bias or a judgment inside themselves. Then you look at that and you say, that's part of my shadow. So when I can embrace it and I go, yep, I'm aware I have a judgment about X, Y, Z. I have a judgment about these kind of people or this kind of situation. When I say, yes, I have that judgment. I know that's there. Now, let me learn how to work with that. Let me learn how to improve that. Let me learn how to not live from that space.
Right.
Because otherwise it shows up unconsciously in our comments and where we live and what we say, how we do. It's going to show up even though we might go, oh no, I have no biases. I have no judgments. Yes, you do. You're in a human body. Everybody does.
Right.
So this is what we're talking about, is looking at the parts of yourself that you'd like to ignore.
Right.
The parts of yourself that you'd like to not embrace, and realizing they have a gift.
Mm-hmm.
They have a gift to teach you. And that's why you embrace them. So in metaphysics, often people want to get rid of, oh, that part of me is terrible. Let me
cast
it out. I'm going to exorcise that demon of demon of anger inside of myself. I'm sure it's not me. I'm sure it's somebody else, right? I'm sure it's just attached to me. No, it's probably you.
Probably you.
And it's about saying, I accept that part of me. It is okay that I have a temper. It is okay that I know under the right circumstances I could kill someone. I choose not to, and I hope I'm never in those circumstances. I hope that never happens. But inside each of us is that Hitler. Inside each of us is a mean person. Inside each of us is somebody judgmental.
And you may ask the question, why do I want to go make friends with that part of being, they're a mean person, they could kill someone, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality, folks, is you're here to become whole. All light, all sunshine creates a desert, right? All shadow, nothing grows. It's a balance. Think of the yin and yang symbol. You've got white, you've got black, and inside of those, you've got a little white in the black and a little black in the white.
Balance.
Right? Balance. Absolute balance. There's a teaching that says, as above, so below, as above. All right. There's more to it than that, but those will work. For us, when we work on becoming whole, we suddenly stop judging ourselves. We stop trying to say, I have to be this perfect being. I have to always think this way. I have to always think that way. And suddenly you realize all of who I am is still divine. All of who I am is still part of the one consciousness. It's about being whole. It's not about being pure. It's not about being pious. It's not about being all one way. You are a whole being. And this, what we're talking about with walking with your shadow, getting to know your shadow. I think it was Rumi. That had a story at one point where he took a walk with Satan, and he was just walking along the pathway talking to him like a friend, and realizing that there was a lot he had to learn, and that ultimately, please remember, Rumi did make it to oneness. That's everything he writes is about oneness and about being in that state of pure love. So my point is, walk with those parts of you that you dislike. Make friends with them. Get to know what it's offering you. Be present with all of who you are. Let me say that again. Be present with all of who you are. And look at all of who you are with radical acceptance. Just absolute radical acceptance. I love you. I accept you. I set you free.
Well, because there are some, again, it's nothing wrong with it, but there are some churches that would be considered metaphysical who are the smiling, happy people. And they don't ever want to hear about bad things. They always want to know life's great, and everybody smiles every Sunday, and they're all like, life's perfect in my world, and you know
and don't talk about things that are negative, because you'll make it come true. Okay, it's already true.
Right.
Not acknowledging it is just called denial.
Yeah.
And that is not just a river in Egypt, by the way, or Africa, however you want to put it.
But it is. It's about accepting the whole, and seeing the beauty in the whole, right? And seeing the beauty in the dark and the light, not just in one or the other. And we talk a lot about the game of life and working up the levels of the game, and that's part of it. Is the what you have that you refuse to look at and accept inside yourself weighs you down. It weighs you down, and you can't keep moving. And you want to move forward. We want to evolve. We want to go up those levels. We want to continue to oneness, to source, to acceptance, and accepting of all that you are. You can't say that part of me shouldn't go to oneness. It's bad. It all is oneness. It's all part of source, and it all returns.
Yes, please try to define oneness as two-ness and see how well that works. It's all inclusive, really and truly.
So part of why you do shadow work is so that you can
keep
rising through the levels. That's if you want to know the key to moving up the levels in the game and getting to that point of complete bliss and oneness, it is truly accepting that part of you don't want to accept, facing it, square on.
And accepting is part of it. Some of it is actually also learning to forgive yourself. And forgiveness, I'm going to make this statement, it comes from A Course in Miracles. Most of you may throw things at me. But forgiveness occurs when you recognize nothing wrong ever happened. Right? Forgiveness occurs when you recognize that nothing wrong ever happened. Right? Yes, that's a little bit of a mind twist. Because we're so used to saying, well, so-and-so did something wrong to me, but I forgive them. No, you really didn't. You just want to feel superior. Right? If you forgave them, you would recognize that there was a gift in what they did for you. You would honor the gift, and then you would thank them for the gift and move on in freedom for both of you. As long as you are holding any unforgiveness towards yourself or another being, you are not working your shadow. You are not walking with it to bring it to the light.
Well, because everything that you've experienced in this form, in this body, in this life, everything you've experienced made you who you are today.
Right.
Good, bad, and ugly, right? So someone who's had an extremely traumatic life, often when they go through this kind of work and they heal themselves and they're in a good space, wish, of course, maybe there was an easier way they could have learned the lesson, but they learned to love themselves.
Right.
They learned they were a strong person. They learned they were intuitive. They learned they were compassionate. And they learned that because they had a crappy life. And when you can go back and you can look at whatever the situation is in your own experience and thank it, truly appreciate the experience that you had, it shifts everything completely.
Tricia and I worked with a very specialized population before we met each other. And that was folks who were ritual abuse survivors, and at that time were known as multiple personality. It's now dissociative identity disorder, right? So when you hear us say, there is no evil, please understand we have worked with people who have experienced what you would consider ultimately evil, all right? And it was a very interesting experience for me, that's all I can say with it. But what I learned, and that's where we learned that all those demons, I remember one of the first ones I worked with, my very first meeting with him, I sit down in my chair, and he's in a chair across from me, and he goes, "I'm a demon." And I just looked at him and smiled and said, "Great, some of my best friends are. What are you here for?" Right? And what he was that aspect of this young man who had shown up to stop the abuse he went through. And to do that, he had to be extremely angry, he had to be relatively violent and fight back to keep the person safe. Right? Was he a demon? Not at all. And that's what you find when you walk with your shadow. Those things that you're afraid of are the things that have kept you safe. They are the things that they hold the key to turn you on to ultimate success. They hold the key to your happiness, to your peace. And as long as you're doing this with them, or this with them, they can't give you the gift. Or they can still give it to you. You start accepting it because you're doing this. I don't want that. I don't want that. That gift you're handing to me looks like it's covered in used toilet paper. I don't want that. I don't want to touch it. Go deal with it. Walk with that part of yourself. Embrace that part of yourself. There is no part of you that will not make it home. There is no part of any human on this planet that will not make it home. That's pure and simple. And you know the reason I can say that? We've never left home. Right? We just think we have at this moment.
So the first step is just to identify what you would call your shadow. Things you don't want to look at, personality traits, life experiences, things that you think you could do, like kill someone or run around naked or whatever that isn't acceptable in your culture. Look at those pieces and parts of you, the things in your parents that you didn't like that now are showing up in your life and in your personality and it might be there. And look at those pieces first. Write them down. Journal about them. Acknowledge them. Then take each one and see what you gained from that. Was there a gift there in that experience, that trauma, that life, whatever, through your parents? Maybe, we knew someone who said they learn from everybody. Sometimes they learn what to do, and sometimes they learn what not to do, right? And so, maybe you learned what not to do, but you have to go, that's inside of me, and that's something that I need to look at and thank, and then decide that I don't need to do that. I don't need to go be angry today. I have the potential to be angry, but I choose not to today. And then, so it's acknowledge what they are, look at it, have a conversation, see the gift, thank that part of you, and then walk with that part of you. Know that it's not about getting rid of. It's about embracing, walking with, befriending all the aspects inside yourself. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The acceptable and the unacceptable. And not trying to push it down, push it away, exercise it, whatever. You might go exercise it.
It might need some little exercise.
But not exercise it.
No.
Yeah, anytime, for me too, anytime I had a lot of people who came to me from this specialized population who had been severely abused and were often taken to churches to be exorcised. Exorcised. They thought they had demons, they told them they needed to be outed, send them away, whatever. And I know there are people that do that in the metaphysical community as well.
Yeah.
I personally think that we just need to thank whoever that is. If it is truly an external entity, thank it and move it on.
Right.
Or if it's not, and in most of cases, every case I knew with multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder, it was not. It was an internal part that would just go be exercised and go unconscious and show back up later. They didn't go anywhere. It's part of you. They didn't leave. And so then it was a matter of asking and seeing what the gift was, thanking them for keeping them alive, and embracing that part and integrating that part into the whole.
I have another friend who puts it this way: as you identify those shadow parts of yourself, and you may not want them to have the job they previously had for you that pushed them into the shadows, so you simply acknowledge them, acknowledge what they have done for you, and you give them a new job in your life. So if it's a protector that was someone who was protecting you from abuse at a younger time, now they can be that part of you, I will guarantee, is highly intuitive, and it senses energies and things before they happen. That's how they learn to protect and when they need to come out. Right? Now they can still protect you by heightening your intuition. They can feed your intuitive abilities. They can feed your ability to read energies and situations that will still keep you safe. Same job, different way of doing it.
And what we're talking about really in psychology, we call it ego states.
Yeah.
So all of us have them. We have a child ego state, we have a critical mom ego state, a critical dad ego state. We have these ego states inside of us. So it's not like we're all multiple personalities to that extent, but we do all have multiple aspects within ourselves.
Right.
They're just integrated as one person.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else? So
I think
love your shadow.
love your shadow.
Don't try to cast it out.
No, it's part of you.
Embrace it. It's part of you. It's not going anywhere. You can pretend to push it away. It just pushes it down, and it's going to come up later in your unconscious behaviors and in your relationships.
I want you to each take one hand, don't care which hand, but one of your hands and put it on your leg. Right? Now push, push, push. Just keep pushing as hard as you can possibly push. What's happening to your arm? Your leg's not moving, is it?
No.
What's happening to your hand and your arm? Is it hurt yet?
Tired.
Yeah. How much energy are you wasting suppressing your shadow, or trying to get rid of your shadow, that you could use that energy for other things in your life, other ways of creating the relationships, the jobs, whatever it may be? If you simply embrace the shadow, you're no longer having to expend the amount of energy to hold it down, to push it away. Embrace the energy. That's one of the biggest gifts, is you get your energy back, folks. You literally have no clue how much energy most people spend just trying to keep their shadow at bay. Right?
And sometimes it's just emotions, sometimes experiences, all kinds of things. So with that, the goal is to love yourself. That's it.
That's it.
All aspects of you, good, bad, ugly. Love yourself. That's who you are, and the more you can do that, the more you can clear that the other stuff away, and you can love all aspects of who you are, the better and faster and easier you move up the levels of the game. That's just the rules.
Right.
That's how you do it. This is a huge piece for most people to realize it's really that simple.
I'm gonna say one more thing, and then it's probably time to
It
move on
probably
to
is.
the
I
last
keep trying
questions.
to, I keep trying to like.
So, I
get
know, you
there.
keep wrapping it up. I've heard your synopsis about 4
I keep
times.
wrapping it up. Go ahead.
Whenever you look out here and you see someone else and boy, that's an awful person, boy, that's terrible behavior, and you're looking at that and you're passing judgment on it, just realize everything out here is a mirror. And all you're seeing is a reflection of what's inside you. They're showing you your own shadow. Alright? Don't blame the mirror for what it shows you. Go figure out how to.
And that
find
is one of the
inside.
ways to know your shadow, is if you really hate something in someone else. It's normally a mirror of something inside you. If you just, oh, I can't imagine that person's awful. If you really hate something in someone else, then it's probably some part of that is inside of you, and you need to look at it.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Alright, now I think we can say, alright, we're going to take a
Thank you very
break.
much.
We'll turn the camera off, you can get up, walk around, have a drink, then we're gonna turn it back on, and you can ask questions. We'll still try not to use your names, but, you know.
Well, you can hit the button now.